Close your eyes for just a moment and picture this. You're standing in the heart of a medieval town square, surrounded by a whirlwind of color and sound. The laughter of children mixes with the clanging of blacksmiths' hammers, while the rich aroma of spiced wine and freshly baked bread hangs heavy in the air. A jester tumbles past, his bells jingling, as merchants call out their wares from wooden stalls draped in vibrant fabrics. At first glance, this scene might seem like pure spectacle, a grand party meant to distract from the hardships of daily life. But what if I told you these festivals were so much more than just entertainment? They were the beating heart of medieval society, woven into the very fabric of how people lived, worshipped, and governed. Think about the last time you attended a community event, maybe a county fair or a holiday festival. There's a magic to those gatherings, a way they make us feel connected to something larger than ourselves. Now multiply that feeling by 1,000, and you'll start to grasp the significance of medieval festivals. These weren't just casual diversions, they were vital lifelines that held communities together. They marked the turning of the seasons, celebrated religious devotion, and even served as covert political tools where kings and nobles could assert their power without drawing a sword. Behind the laughter and the feasting lay a complex web of social contracts, economic exchanges, and cultural traditions that shaped the medieval world in ways we're only beginning to fully appreciate. So why have we reduced these monumental events to mere footnotes in history, remembered only for their jesters and turkey legs? The truth is, medieval festivals were a masterclass in human ingenuity, a way to communicate, to negotiate, and to survive in a world far harsher than our own. Over the next few minutes, we'll peel back the layers of these extraordinary gatherings, uncovering how they fueled economies, reinforced faith, and even prevented wars. You'll never look at a Renaissance fair the same way again, because what you're about to discover will reveal just how deeply these celebrations were tied to the very survival of medieval life. Ready to see history in a whole new light? Let's begin. To truly understand medieval festivals, we have to step inside the mindset of a world where faith wasn't just a personal belief, it was the rhythm of daily life. Imagine a calendar where every turning point, from the first spring planting to the darkest days of winter, was marked by a sacred celebration. These weren't arbitrary dates, they were divine appointments woven into the very fabric of time by the Church. Take Christmas and Easter, for example. Today, we might associate them with gifts and chocolate eggs, but in the Middle Ages, these were anchors of the liturgical year, surrounded by weeks of preparation, feasting, and theatrical reenactments that brought scripture to life for entire towns. Picture a bustling marketplace transformed into an open-air stage, where carpenters and farmers doubled as actors performing mystery plays. These weren't just entertainment, they were Sunday school for the masses. With most people unable to read, the Church turned biblical stories into vivid spectacles. The story of Noah's Ark might unfold on a rolling cart pulled through the streets, complete with a makeshift flood and papier-mâché animals. The tale of David and Goliath could feature a local blacksmith in towering armor, toppling dramatically before a cheering crowd. These performances did more than teach. They made faith visceral, turning abstract parables into shared experiences that bonded communities. But the spiritual heartbeat of these festivals pulsed loudest during processions. On Corpus Christi, for instance, entire towns would parade behind priests carrying the Eucharist under embroidered canopies, their path strewn with flower petals. Saints' feast days turned into neighborhood block parties where reverence and revelry intertwined. Pilgrims flocked to festivals showcasing relics, a splinter from the true cross or a saint's finger bone, believing these objects radiated divine power. Even the bawdiest celebrations, like the Feast of Fools, where low-ranking clergy temporarily ruled the church in playful parody, served a purpose. They released social tensions within the safe container of sacred tradition. What's fascinating is how these events balanced solemnity and joy. A single festival might begin with a tearful prayer vigil at dawn, shift to raucous games and feasting by noon, and end with candlelit hymns at dusk. This wasn't hypocrisy, it was humanity. The church understood that devotion thrives when it engages both the spirit and the senses. By weaving faith into festivals, they created a world where the sacred and the everyday weren't separate realms, but different notes in the same soaring hymn. While the spiritual and social dimensions of medieval festivals were profound, their economic impact could rival modern trade expos. Picture a sprawling field transformed into a temporary city of commerce, where the clink of coins mingled with the calls of merchants haggling in half a dozen languages. The Champagne fairs of 12th century France weren't just regional gatherings, they were the medieval equivalent of today's global trade summits, where Flemish wool met Italian silks and Middle Eastern spices changed hands alongside Baltic amber. For weeks at a time, these fairs turned quiet countryside into bustling metropolises, complete with makeshift banks where money changers weighed silver pennies and issued early forms of credit notes. What made these events so revolutionary was their predictability. Unlike sporadic markets, major festivals operated on fixed cycles, say, the Troyes Fair every July or the Provence Fair every November, allowing merchants to plan complex, year-long trade routes. A German linen trader might sell his wares in Champagne one month, use the profits to buy Spanish leather in Burgos the next, then return home via the Frankfurt Fair. This rhythmic commerce created Europe's first reliable trade networks, with festival sites evolving into permanent trading posts. The Champagne region alone saw its economy skyrocket as innkeepers, cartwrights, and guards found steady work supporting the flow of goods. Guilds leveraged these gatherings like modern brands at a trade show. A cobbler's guild might stage elaborate shoe-making demonstrations, luring wealthy patrons with intricate leatherwork. Goldsmiths displayed their finest pieces not just to sell, but to attract noble commissions that would fund their workshops for months. For apprentices, festivals were living job fairs, a chance to impress masters from distant cities and secure coveted positions. Even peasant families participated, turning festival days into crucial income streams. A farmer's wife might sell her surplus cheeses and woven baskets, while her children earned pennies minding merchants' horses. The financial innovations born at these fairs still echo today. With traders from different kingdoms needing to exchange currencies, money changers developed early banking systems, creating letters of credit to avoid carrying heavy coin chests. Some historians trace modern insurance practices to the fair courts that mediated disputes between merchants, and when a lord granted safe conduct to travelers en route to his festival, he was effectively creating medieval trade protections. Far from being mere diversions, these vibrant marketplaces quietly laid the foundations for the economic systems that would fuel the Renaissance and ultimately our modern world. What's often overlooked is how festivals balanced commerce with community. While merchants struck deals in one quarter, neighbors might be bartering eggs for wool in another, reinforcing local networks alongside global trade. The same fairground that hosted a genospice merchant might also host a village elder resolving a land dispute under the ancient Tree of Justice. This dual role, as both international marketplace and hometown square, made medieval festivals unparalleled engines of prosperity, where every transaction, from a duke's jewel purchase to a farmer's honey sale, wove another thread into the fabric of a thriving society. Beneath the colorful pageantry of medieval festivals lay a masterclass in political theater, a stage where kings and nobles didn't just entertain, but enacted power in real time. Take the field of the Cloth of Gold in 1520, where Henry VIII of England and Francis I of France transformed a meadow into a shimmering arena of diplomacy. For over 2 weeks, these rival monarchs hosted jousts, feasts, and masquerades so extravagant that tents were woven with actual gold thread. But this wasn't just a party, it was a high-stakes game of one-upmanship. Every gilded goblet, every imported wine, every suit of armor etched with royal insignia screamed a silent message. My treasury is deeper, my artisans more skilled, my court more magnificent. What made these displays so effective was their accessibility. Unlike castle walls that separated rulers from the people, festivals threw open the gates. When a king presided over a tournament, even the lowliest farmer could glimpse his sovereign in sunlight, a living icon atop a draped platform, tossing coins to the crowd. These carefully choreographed moments of generosity weren't random acts, they were investments in loyalty. A noble sponsoring a mystery play about Saint George slaying the dragon might subtly cast himself as the patron saint's earthly counterpart, the protector of the realm. Bread distributed during feast days came stamped with the Lord's crest, turning sustenance into propaganda. The real genius lay in how festivals masked control as celebration. Take the tradition of entry ceremonies, where a new ruler processed through towns upon taking power. Streets would be scrubbed, fountains would flow with wine, and citizens would stage tableau vivants, living pictures of biblical scenes. But woven between these spectacles were unmissable symbols, the royal coat of arms displayed at every corner, the mayor surrendering the city keys on bended knee. By the time the dancing began, the message was cemented. Resistance wasn't just treason, it would spoil the fun. Diplomacy thrived in this carnival atmosphere. A marriage alliance might be sealed not with a dry contract, but with a week-long festival where both families showcased their wealth through exotic foods and rare fabrics. Foreign ambassadors invited to witness a king's largesse, like the 500 pheasants served at one Burgundian banquet, returned home with tales that bolstered their host's reputation. Even rebellions could be quelled without bloodshed. After suppressing a revolt, savvy rulers often threw public reconciliations feasts, where former foes broke bread beneath banners proclaiming the king's mercy. Perhaps most strikingly, festivals became laboratories for governance. The same crowds that cheered acrobats might later gather to hear royal proclamations read from makeshift stages. Tax collectors often worked the festival circuit, their demands softened by the context of celebration. And when a dispute between rival guilds threatened to boil over, a carefully timed archery contest could redirect competitive energy into harmless sport. In an era before newspapers or social media, these gatherings were the ultimate multimedia platform, a place where power wasn't just asserted, but performed, witnessed, and remembered in stories told for generations. The brilliance of this system, subjects didn't feel manipulated, they felt included. A peasant might never enter a castle's great hall, but at Whitsuntide, he could watch his lord serve him ale with his own hands during the ritual of the king for a day. These carefully scripted reversals where elites briefly humbled themselves actually reinforced the social order by making hierarchy feel benevolent. By the time the last embers of the bonfire died down, the message was clear. This world of knights and kings wasn't just inevitable, it was festive, thrilling, and worth preserving. At first glance, the strict hierarchies of medieval life seemed unshakable. Peasants bowed to lords, apprentices obeyed masters, and everyone knew their place. But festivals created cracks in that rigid structure, offering fleeting moments where social roles softened. Picture May Day morning, when village girls wove flower crowns for themselves and the local lord's daughter alike, their hands brushing as they twined daisies into chains. Or imagine harvest season, when the wealthiest merchant and the poorest field hand shared the same loaf of bread at a feast table piled high with the fruits of their collective labor. These weren't just breaks from routine, they were carefully engineered pressure valves for society. The genius of these gatherings lay in their ability to balance hierarchy with harmony. A noble might ceremonially serve ale to peasants during the Feast of Fools, but everyone understood this temporary role reversal only reinforced the normal order once the festival ended. Yet in that shared laughter over spilled drinks, something profound happened, a human connection transcending class. Archery contests pitted farmers against knights, letting skill momentarily outweigh status when an especially accurate shot earned cheers from all sides. Even the seating at communal meals followed subtle rules. Tables might be arranged in strict order of rank, but the act of eating the same food under the same sky created invisible threads of mutual dependence. Beyond easing tensions, festivals built what we'd now call social capital. When an entire village danced around the maypole, their interwoven ribbons became a physical metaphor for community. The cooperative effort to build bonfires for midsummer or construct elaborate mystery play stages taught people how to work together across divides. Young men who might feud during the year found common cause preparing tournament grounds, while women who normally moved in separate spheres collaborated on embroidered banners for processions. These shared projects created networks of obligation and trust that lasted long after the festival tents came down, networks that could mean survival when famine or conflict struck. Perhaps most powerfully, festivals offered psychological relief from the grinding hardships of medieval life. For a few precious days, the serf bound to his lord's land could imagine himself a champion jouster. The weaver's back bent over a loom straightened to dance in the town square. Even the most destitute could taste roasted meats at a patron's feast or warm themselves by the Yule log in the manor hall. This wasn't mere escapism, it was a vital reminder that joy existed and that it was best experienced together. When winter came and food stores ran low, memories of that shared abundance became a kind of sustenance, proof that their community could create light even in dark times. The echoes of this social alchemy still resonate today. Modern street festivals and neighborhood potlucks unconsciously mimic these medieval traditions, recognizing that breaking bread together remains one of humanity's most potent tools for building belonging. What the medievals understood intuitively, that celebration isn't frivolity, but the mortar holding society's bricks together, might be worth rediscovering in our own fragmented world. After all, when was the last time you shared a meal with someone from a completely different walk of life? The medieval answer would be simple: at the next festival where everyone's invited. In a world where few could read the words on a page, medieval festivals turned the entire town into a living textbook. The mystery plays performed on makeshift stages weren't just entertainment, they were vivid moral lessons, with every devil's costume and angel's halo carefully designed to imprint right and wrong on the audience's imagination. Picture a shoemaker watching the story of the prodigal son unfold in his own marketplace. The reckless youth squandering his inheritance, the moment of despair among swine, the father's tearful embrace. For that shoemaker, the lesson about forgiveness wasn't abstract. It was as tangible as the wooden cart serving as the stage, as real as his neighbor playing the repentant son. These performances turned theology into something you could see, hear, and feel. A far cry from dry sermons in Latin that most couldn't understand, but the education didn't stop at religion. Minstrels were the walking newspapers of their day, weaving current events into ballads that spread from town to town. A battle in distant Flanders might become a stirring song about courage, while a local scandal transformed into a cautionary tale about greed. Their verses preserved history too. The exploits of Charlemagne or King Arthur weren't confined to dusty manuscripts but lived in the refrains sung at fairs and taverns. Even children absorbed these stories, learning their cultural heritage through catchy rhymes rather than textbooks. Tournaments, often dismissed as mere sport, were equally instructional. When knights clashed in the lists, they weren't just showing off strength, they were modeling chivalry's complex code. A young squire watching his lord bow to the queens stand before a joust learned that skill meant nothing without courtesy. The loser gracefully accepting defeat taught dignity in adversity, while the winner sharing his prize with the poor demonstrated nobility's responsibilities. These were lessons in motion, ethics performed rather than preached. The brilliance of this system lay in its subtlety. A mother pointing to a play's villain could warn her child about deceit without a lecture. A farmer humming a minstrel's tune about a disastrous rebellion might unknowingly absorb loyalty to the crown. Even festival games had layers. Archery contests kept vital combat skills sharp, while chess matches under festival tents trained minds in strategy. For communities where formal schooling was rare, these gatherings were the ultimate immersive education, proving that sometimes the best way to teach isn't with a rod or a scroll, but with a song, a spectacle, and a shared cup of ale. What's remarkable is how these methods still resonate. Modern museums use interactive exhibits, teachers employ role-playing, and viral videos distill complex ideas into catchy visuals, all echoes of the medieval understanding that when learning feels like celebration, it sticks. The next time you effortlessly recall lyrics from a song or scenes from a movie, remember, you're proof that the festival's magic still works centuries later. Deep in the bone-weary exhaustion of the harvest season, when calloused hands ached from swinging scythes under the August sun, medieval villages didn't just collapse into rest, they erupted into celebration. Llamas falling on the 1st of August wasn't merely a festival, it was a collective sigh of relief written in loaves of bread. Picture the scene, the first sheaves of wheat, painstakingly grown since spring's first sowing, now ground into flour and baked into a ceremonial loaf. The village priest would bless it at the church altar, not as some abstract ritual, but as a visceral thank you to the earth itself. Every bite of that consecrated bread carried the weight of survival, a tangible reward for months of backbreaking labor. This wasn't isolated gratitude. The agricultural calendar dictated the very pulse of medieval life, with festivals acting as rhythmic markers in nature's unrelenting cycle. At Candlemas in early February, when winter's grip still held firm, families burned last year's straw beds in great purifying bonfires, symbolically clearing space for new growth. Come May Day, young couples danced around flowering hawthorns, their interlacing ribbons mirroring the fertility they prayed would bless their fields. Even the timing was precise. Planting festivals coincided with the damp warmth needed for seeds to take root, while harvest celebrations aligned with the fleeting window before autumn rains could ruin crops. The brilliance of these traditions lay in their dual purpose. A midwinter feast like Yule did more than ward off the gloom of December. It strategically pooled scarce resources. Neighbors contributed hoarded grain, salted meats, and preserved fruits to communal tables, ensuring no one starved before spring. The act of sharing wasn't just charitable, it was pragmatic survival, reinforcing that next year's planting would require every able hand. Likewise, the frenzied merriment of Midsummer's Eve, with its towering bonfires meant to mimic the sun's power, wasn't mere superstition. The fire's smoke repelled insects threatening crops, while the ashes were scattered as fertilizer, a perfect marriage of ritual and practicality. Consider how differently we mark time today. Our calendars are filled with arbitrary dates, fiscal quarters, daylight saving adjustments disconnected from the natural world. But medieval festivals flowed like a conversation with the land. When peasants celebrated the vernal equinox with egg races and seed blessing ceremonies, they weren't just welcoming spring, they were synchronizing their labor with the sun's journey. A failed festival might mean a missed planting window, and that could spell famine. The stakes infused these celebrations with an urgency we've largely forgotten. What's haunting is how these agricultural rites preserved knowledge before the age of science. The rhyme, ash before oak, we're in for a soak, oak before ash, we're in for a splash, wasn't folk poetry. It was meteorology encoded in verse, helping farmers predict rainy seasons by tree bud sequences. Young children learned crop rotation not from textbooks, but by participating in rogation-tide processions, where priests led congregations to bless field boundaries while elders pointed out which plots lay fallow. Even the stars played a role. The Harvest Moon Festival timed the reaping of grapes to when moonlight extended working hours. Every song, every dance, every garland woven held practical wisdom disguised as revelry. Perhaps most moving is how these festivals transformed grueling labor into collective joy. Threshing grain under a September sun became a competition, with the fastest worker crowned Harvest Lord and carried home on a laughing crowd's shoulders. Apple picking turned into courtship rituals, with young men climbing trees to toss fruit to sweethearts below. In an era where one bad season could mean starvation, these celebrations didn't just honor the land, they made loving it possible. The laughter echoing across a freshly harvested field at Michaelmas wasn't just relief. It was defiance, a declaration that even in a world of uncertainty, people could still find light in the turning of the seasons. That legacy lingers in unexpected places. Modern farmers' markets with their seasonal produce, the resurgence of solstice gatherings, even the primal comfort we feel around a campfire. These are faint echoes of a time when humanity's survival depended on reading nature's cues. The medievals understood something we're relearning, that aligning our lives with the earth's rhythms isn't just poetic, it's profoundly wise. Their festivals were more than parties. They were the original almanacs, written not in ink, but in shared bread, firelight, and the collective memory of what it means to be nourished by the world around us. Beneath the swirling skirts of dancers and the cheerful clamor of merchants, medieval festivals hid a shadowy underbelly. For every noble knight competing honorably in tournaments, there were charlatans selling bogus relics, a rabbit's bone passed off as a saint's finger, or watered-down magic potions that promised everything from cured gout to a spouse's fidelity. Pickpockets thrived in the press of crowds, their nimble fingers slipping into purses while victims gaped at fire-eaters or jugglers. Records from 14th century London described gangs operating like clockwork during fairs, with lookouts whistling warnings as guards approached. The very gatherings meant to uplift communities also became magnets for every kind of mischief. Authorities responded with ingenious and often brutal deterrents. Town criers didn't just announce festival schedules, they bellowed warnings like "Beware the cutpurses," alongside lists of punishments awaiting thieves. The stocks stood prominently near merry-go-rounds, their wooden frames clamping the wrists and ankles of offenders while revelers pelted them with rotten vegetables. In Germany, some towns employed tolerance masters who patrolled with sharp-eyed assistants, empowered to settle disputes on the spot, whether by confiscating a vendor's fraudulent scales or dragging brawling drunkards to the dunking stool. The irony was palpable. Events celebrating unity required an iron fist to maintain peace. Yet the crackdowns themselves became a kind of theater. When a pickpocket was paraded through the crowd with stolen goods pinned to his hat, it wasn't just justice, it was a living cautionary tale. Proclamations read from festival stages took advantage of captive audiences to announce new taxes or curfews, blending governance with entertainment. In York, the annual mystery plays included a scene where Satan's demons dragged a corrupt merchant to hell, complete with smoke and eerie laughter, a not-so-subtle reminder that earthly crimes had divine consequences. The darkest tensions often flared along class lines. Noble tournaments might proceed with chivalrous decorum, but peasant wrestling matches frequently devolved into bloody brawls fueled by ale and old grudges. Some lords hired festival wardens armed with blunt clubs to separate combatants, while others turned a blind eye, viewing the chaos as a harmless release valve. But when violence spilled beyond boundaries like the 1483 Frankfurt Fair, where a gambling dispute escalated into a riot burning half the market, crackdowns were swift and severe. Punishments shifted from shaming to mutilation, a thief's ear nailed to the city gate, a brawler's hand severed with a butcher's cleaver. What's fascinating is how communities threaded the needle between freedom and control. Alewives could sell their brew, but only in approved measures. Minstrels could satirize the powerful but avoid direct treason. Even the traditional Lord of Misrule, who presided over festive anarchy, was often a respected elder in disguise, ensuring chaos never tipped into true rebellion. This delicate dance reveals a profound medieval truth. Joy without boundaries became danger, but control without mercy bred resentment. The festival grounds, then, were a testing ground for the social contract itself, a place where society negotiated how much wildness it could tolerate before the music stopped. Modern events still grapple with this balance. Security cameras now watch where town criers once shouted, and anti-theft signs replace wooden stocks. But the core challenge remains: how to preserve the magic of collective celebration without letting darkness eclipse the light. Perhaps that's why medieval solutions still resonate. Their blend of spectacle and severity reminds us that the price of shared joy is eternal vigilance. Imagine walking into a medieval banquet hall where the air is thick with the scent of saffron-roasted peacock and honey-glazed boar. These weren't just meals, they were edible propaganda. A single feast could burn through a lord's entire yearly spice budget in one night, with dishes like gilded swans and sugar sculptures of castles making it clear this host had wealth to waste. But the brilliance of these displays wasn't just in the extravagance, it was in the precision. The higher your seat at the table, the rarer your plate's contents. A duke might savor venison in peppercorn sauce, while lower-ranking guests made do with salted pork, their portions silently mapping the social ladder in meat and marrow. Sumptuary laws turned dining into a legally enforced performance. In 14th century England, only nobles above a certain rank could serve dishes containing more than 3 exotic spices. The colors of your sauces even sent messages: gold leaf garnish for royalty, saffron yellow for merchants who'd paid hefty taxes to flaunt their success. When a wealthy wool trader risked imprisonment for serving peacock at his daughter's wedding, it wasn't just about poultry, it was about threatening the natural order. These edible rules were so strict that household account books often listed spices separately from other groceries, treating them like controlled substances. Yet festivals offered delicious loopholes. On Corpus Christi, even the lowliest serf might taste roast pheasant from the Lord's table, his usual barley bread replaced by fine white manchet loaves. The symbolism was potent. For one day, the peasant wasn't just fed. He was honored with food normally above his station. Shared drinking horns passed between nobles and commoners during harvest feasts created fleeting equality. their ale-drenched rims erasing class distinctions with every sip. Even the act of serving carried meaning. When a countess personally presented wine to villagers at Christmas, her gesture of humility actually reinforced her position as benefactor. The rituals around eating were just as loaded as the food itself. A toast with imported wine wasn't just celebration, it was a public test of loyalty, with hesitation to drink signaling possible dissent. Knights sharing a trencher of meat from the same bread plate demonstrated brotherhood, while refusing to break bread with someone was tantamount to declaring war. Records from Burgundian banquets describe elaborate, intremate courses designed purely for theater, like pies bursting with live birds or miniature ships sailing down tables on edible seas. These weren't just whimsy, they demonstrated the host's power to bend nature itself to his will. What's often overlooked is how these feasts functioned as early economic stimulus packages. Preparing a royal banquet could employ every butcher, baker, and candlestick maker for miles. The demand for exotic ingredients fueled global trade, with Venetian merchants risking pirate attacks to transport Malabar peppercorns for noble tables. Leftovers followed strict redistribution protocols: day-old meat pies to the poor, bones to the castle dogs, grease to soap makers, creating a cascade of benefits beyond the hall. Even the waste was calculated. Tossing half-eaten delicacies to the crowd wasn't just generosity. It transformed scraps into yet another display of abundance. The true mastery of these edible theatrics lay in their dual messaging. While the nobility gorged on spice-laden delicacies, they simultaneously funded almshouses and handed out festival bread, ensuring their excess read as benevolence rather than gluttony. A single strawberry, out of season and preserved at great cost, could say more about power than 1,000 speeches. In an age before television or social media, the banquet table was the original broadcast medium, where every bite transmitted silent lessons about status, loyalty, and the fragile dance between generosity and control. Modern dinner parties with their artisanal cheeses and Instagrammable charcuterie boards are faint echoes of this tradition, proof that even today, we still use food to say what words cannot. The moment a troubadour plucked the first string of his lute in a crowded festival square, something extraordinary happened. Time itself seemed to shift. The drone of bagpipes could turn a Sama religious procession into a swaying river of devotion, while the insistent beat of a tabor drum set feet tapping in perfect unison, transforming strangers into a single, pulsing organism. Music in medieval festivals wasn't mere entertainment. It was the invisible hand that shaped emotions, dictated rhythms, and rewrote social rules on the fly. Consider the carol, that quintessential circle dance where nobles and peasants linked hands, moving step by step to verses about love or loss. On any other day, a duke wouldn't dream of touching a farmer's calloused fingers, but when the flute played and the circle spun, hierarchy melted like spring snow. Every instrument carried its own secret language. The shawm's piercing wail announced a royal entrance long before the trumpeters came into view, while the gentle clinking of finger cymbals guided devotional dancers into trance-like reverence. Even church bells joined the symphony, their peals choreographed into complex patterns that told townsfolk when to gather, pray, or celebrate. But perhaps most fascinating were the unsung heroes, the village women who hummed weaving songs as they braided festival garlands, or the children who clapped out rhythms with wooden spoons, their makeshift percussion keeping time for grander performances. This was music without boundaries, where sacred harmonies blended with tavern tunes, and a single melody might begin as a hymn at dawn, only to be reinvented as a raucous drinking song by midnight. The power of these sounds went deeper than mere amusement. Minstrels were the era's social media algorithms, tailoring their repertoires to the crowd. A clever troubadour might tweak a ballad's lyrics to flatter the local lord, ensuring his supper that night came with extra meat. Traveling musicians carried news in their verses, turning battles and scandals into rhyming couplets that stuck in listeners' minds better than any proclamation. And when tensions threatened to boil over, say, between rival guilds during a crowded fair, a well-timed round of "Suma is Ikumen in" could diffuse tempers with its infectious, looping harmonies. Dance, too, was a silent negotiator of social contracts. The solemn estampai, with its intricate footwork, showcased noble grace at tournaments, while peasant reels celebrated fertility with their hip-swaying exuberance. Yet in moments like the Dance of Death during plague years, entire communities moved together in macabre parodies, their skeletons painted on linen robes as they twirled through streets, a chilling reminder of mortality wrapped in cathartic motion. Even the simplest ring dances taught coordination and trust. When a chain of 50 dancers wove through the marketplace without breaking, it was a living metaphor for communal harmony. What's astonishing is how these traditions blurred the line between performer and audience. There were no passive spectators at a medieval festival, only participants waiting for their cue. A merchant might set down his wares to join a polyphonic chorus, his bass voice anchoring the harmonies. A blacksmith's apprentice could borrow a drum and suddenly become the heartbeat of the procession. This collective music-making forged bonds that parchment contracts couldn't match. After all, it's hard to remain enemies with someone who's just harmonized with you on the refrain of a rousing pastorelle. The legacy of this sonic world echoes in unexpected places. Modern flash mobs, protest chants, even stadium waves, they all tap into that ancient understanding that shared rhythm creates shared purpose. Next time you find yourself clapping along at a concert or humming a tune with strangers, remember, you're part of a tradition far older than any festival stage. The medievals knew something we often forget, that when voices and instruments unite, they don't just make music, they make community. A sea of saffron-dyed linen and emerald green wool would flood the streets during medieval festivals, turning every attendee into a walking billboard of their place in society. The noblewoman's ermine-trimmed cloak wasn't just warmth against the spring chill. It was a calculated declaration, each pelt whispering of hunting privileges and royal favor. Beside her, a merchant's wife might sport sleeves slashed to reveal costly silk linings, a daring middle finger to sumptuary laws that technically forbade her such luxuries. Even the humblest farmhand transformed for the day, his usual mud-caked tunic replaced by a homespun shirt bleached to brightness with wood ash and sunlight. In a world without social media profiles, clothing was your bio, and festivals were the ultimate platform to flaunt, fib, or subtly rebel. The rules of this sartorial chess game were shockingly precise. In 1420 Venice, a law decreed that prostitutes must wear yellow veils while noble brides donned white, turning color into a moral GPS for the masses. London's craftsmen could be fined for wearing hose above their station, the quality of their wool betraying aspirations their taxes couldn't support. But the real spectacle unfolded in the details. A countess might commission gloves stitched with seed pearls spelling her husband's battle victories, while a guildmaster's hat bore enameled badges of every city where his trade held sway. These weren't outfits, they were wearable CVs, broadcasting lineage, alliances, and debts without a single word spoken. Carnival season flipped this visual hierarchy on its head. When a baker's daughter slipped into a discarded noble's mask of gilded leather, she wasn't just playing dress-up, she was hacking the system. For 72 delirious hours, a silk-clad prince begging for coins might actually be a cobbler's apprentice, while the beggar tossing silver to the crowd could be the town's richest burgher testing his neighbor's generosity. The masks themselves became works of subversive art. A notary might wear one carved with donkey ears mocking his magistrate brother-in-law, while a group of wives could parade as bishops, their exaggerated mitres swaying to the rhythm of their laughter. Authorities hated these temporary rebellions but tolerated them like a pressure valve on a boiling kettle. Controlled chaos prevented real revolution. What's often overlooked is how festival fashion fueled entire industries. Dyers worked overtime preparing woad blue for May Day revelers, while embroiderers stitched night and day to complete a noble's Pentecost ensemble. The demand for fleeting extravagance birthed innovations, detachable sleeves that could be leased for single events, or paper-thin gold leaf pressed onto fabric to mimic solid gold thread. Even laundry became high stakes. The whiteness of a linen underdress signaled not just cleanliness, but the household's ability to afford servants for constant scrubbing. A single festival could bankrupt a family or launch a tailor's career if his design caught a duchess's eye. The most fascinating outfits were those that bent the rules without breaking them. A clever merchant's wife might line her permitted wool gown with forbidden silk, flashing the illicit fabric only when curtsying. Young lovers exchanged favors, a lady's girdle tied around a knight's arm, a squire's colors tucked into a maiden's bodice, turning personal alliances into public theater. And when plague survivors sewed red crosses onto their festival best, the message was clear: I endured. The clothes made the man, yes, but during these brief, brilliant celebrations, they also let him dream himself into someone else entirely. The thunder of hooves shook the tournament grounds as two armored knights charged toward each other, lances leveled, but this was no mere sporting event. Every tilt in the dust, every shattered spear, was a carefully staged lesson in how nobility ought to behave. When a victorious knight reined in his charger and raised his visor to praise his opponent's courage, he wasn't just being polite, he was performing chivalry for an audience of peasants and princes alike. These spectacles turned abstract virtues into something visceral. Young pages watching from the stands didn't need lectures on honor when they could see it embodied in the knight who paused mid-charge to adjust a rival's loose strap. What made tournaments such powerful teaching tools was their brutal authenticity. Unlike the scripted morality plays of the festival stage, here the risks were real. A poorly aimed lance could shatter ribs, a panicked horse might trample its rider, yet even in these moments of chaos, the code held sway. Chroniclers loved recounting tales like that of the French knight who, after being unhorsed, insisted his opponent's squire bring him water before his own, proving courtesy trumped even pain. Losers faced more than physical wounds, their reputation bled too. A knight caught using weighted armor or bribing heralds might find himself dragged around the field by his spurs, his shield hung upside down in disgrace. The message was clear: true nobility wasn't in your bloodline, but in your actions when the crowd was watching. Yet for all their violence, tournaments were oddly romantic affairs. Between clashes in the lists, knights competed in gentler contests, reciting poetry composed for their ladies, displaying handkerchiefs bestowed as favors. A particularly eloquent declaration of devotion might earn louder cheers than a perfect jousting score. This blending of brutality and tenderness shaped medieval romance at its core. The legendary Lancelot wasn't revered just for his sword arm, but for kneeling in mud-soaked armor to tie Guinevere's loose ribbon around his sleeve. Tournaments turned such moments into living theater, teaching that love and war weren't opposites, but two sides of the same gilded coin. The economic stakes transformed these events into medieval talent shows. A peasant-born knight like William Marshall could catapult from obscurity to regent status through tournament winnings, his captured horses and ransoms funding future campaigns. Sponsorships bloomed early. Wealthy lords bankrolled promising fighters like modern sports teams scout rookies, their colors displayed on the knight's trapper. Even the audience participated in this economy, placing wagers with goldsmiths doubling as bookies, or tossing coins to heralds who composed flattering ballads about their favorites. The ripple effect spread far beyond the arena. Armorers experimented with lighter designs to gain speed advantages, while physicians developed new techniques for treating lance wounds, advancing medieval medicine. Perhaps the most enduring legacy lies in how these contests fossilized into story. The Arthurian romances penned by Cratian de Troyes didn't invent chivalric ideals. They bottled the tournament's essence into narrative form. Modern blockbusters from Star Wars to the Hunger Games still lean on this template. The armored showdown where skill proves worth, the public trial by combat that separates heroes from villains. Even our language bears the imprint. Phrases like winning someone's favor or throwing down the gauntlet are direct descendants of those dusty lists. But the true genius of tournaments was their duality. They allowed knights to practice for war under rules that minimized death, yet kept enough danger to make virtue meaningful. A man might fake piety in church, but not courage when a 1,000-pound destrier was bearing down on him. In an age without cameras or social media, these events were the original reality shows, unscripted, unfiltered, and utterly compelling. When a bleeding contestant raised his sword not in attack, but to salute a lady in the stands, he wasn't just fighting for glory. He was crafting a template for heroism that would outlast castles and crowns. Between the jugglers and the ale stands at any medieval festival, you'd find a far quieter but no less vital trade unfolding: the apothecary's stall. Its wooden shelves crammed with jars of dried vervain, bundles of sage, and twists of bark labeled in careful script. These weren't mere market curiosities. They were the pharmacies of their day, where a mother might barter for chamomile to soothe her child's fever, or a weary laborer seek a poultice for his aching back. What's fascinating is how these healers operated at the intersection of science and spectacle. An herbalist might demonstrate the proper way to harvest valerian root by moonlight, not just to sell his wares, but to pass on knowledge in an era before medical schools. His mortar and pestle became a classroom tool, grinding lessons into memory alongside meadowsweet and mugwort. The real draw for many attendees, though, were the shrine festivals. Picture the dusty road to Canterbury, where pilgrims hobbled on crutches toward Thomas Becket's tomb, their ailments scrawled on scraps of parchment to be left at the shrine. The cathedral precinct would swarm not just with the devout, but with enterprising healers selling Becket's water, vials of spring water blessed by proximity to the saint's relics. Some of these cures likely worked through placebo effect, but others contained genuine medicinals like willow bark, nature's aspirin. The line between miracle and medicine blurred purposefully. When a crippled man tossed aside his crutches after touching a relic, was it divine intervention or the combined power of expectation, music, and communal euphoria? Dancing wasn't just revelry, it was therapy. Medieval physicians swore by movement cures, prescribing rhythmic dances to melancholy patients based on the theory that joy physically expelled black bile from the body. At midsummer festivals, the relentless circling of ring dances was believed to spin the humors back into balance, while the stomping of Morris dancers supposedly drove gout from the joints. Even feasting played its part in this holistic health system. A dish of saffron rice wasn't merely indulgent. The spice was thought to warm sluggish digestion, just as honey-glazed figs moistened a body parched by summer heat. The festival itself became a giant tonic, its very excesses calibrated to reset the system. Wise women and barber surgeons capitalized on these gatherings to share cutting-edge, if sometimes grisly, advances. A traveling bone setter might perform a public tooth extraction using newly designed forceps, his success drawing gasps and coin-filled hats. Midwives exchanged birthing tips over baskets of pennyroyal and motherwort, their whispered knowledge circumventing church bans on female medical practitioners. Some remedies straddled magic and pragmatism. A charm against plague might include legitimate instructions to avoid flea bites, while a dragon's blood amulet often contained actual antiseptic resins. The legacy of these practices lingers in plain sight. Modern wellness fairs with their herbal workshops and yoga demonstrations are direct descendants of medieval health festivals. Just swap saintly relics for crystal healing and humoral theory for gut biome science. Even our phrase, feeling festive, hints at that ancient link between celebration and vitality. The medievals understood what we're relearning, that healing isn't just about compounds and scalpels, but about hope, community, and the subconscious thrill of being alive together under the open sky. Their festivals didn't just treat illness, they reminded people why health was worth fighting for. Beneath the flowering maypole, with its ribbons fluttering like promises in the spring breeze, medieval festivals became the stage for one of life's most delicate dances, the pursuit of love. Young women wove garlands of hawthorn and primrose, their fingers trembling not just from the chill of dawn, but from the knowledge that today, social rules relax just enough to let a glance linger or a hand brush against another's during the weaving game. For serfs bound to their lord's land or merchants' daughters shielded by chaperones, these celebrations offered stolen moments of freedom, a chance to whisper behind the ale stall or steal away during the blindfolded kiss the cobbler game. The very structure of ring dances, where partners changed with each verse, was designed to maximize introductions, turning courtship into a communal project. Matchmakers prowled these gatherings like skilled diplomats, their eyes sharp for advantageous pairings. A widow with a thriving brewery might be steered toward a young cooper in need of capital, their hands joined during the bride's dance as neighbors cheered. Public betrothal announcements at midsummer festivals weren't just romantic gestures, they were legally binding contracts, witnessed by hundreds to prevent future disputes. Records from 14th century Normandy describe a cloth merchant's daughter receiving her betrothed's ring during the feast of St. John. The ceremonial bonfires glow, ensuring everyone saw the diamond's quality and the family's mutual commitment. The festival's soundtrack shaped hearts as much as its rituals. Troubadours spun tales of Tristan and Isolde during evening feasts, their melodies teaching that love could be as tragic as it was glorious. Conversely, bawdy tavern songs about millers' wives and wandering knights offered wink and nod lessons in desire's less poetic aspects. Mystery plays performed on pageant wagons dramatized everything from chaste biblical romances to the scandalous exploits of mythological lovers, their moral ambiguity sparking debates that lasted long after the stages were dismantled. A young couple watching The Smith's Wedding, a popular farce about elopement, might find themselves daring to imagine beyond parental dictates. Material tokens exchanged at festivals carried layers of meaning. A kerchief embroidered with strawberries symbolizing fertility and given during the May Day hunt signaled serious intent, while a carved wooden spoon presented at the harvest feast whispered of domestic aspirations. Even food played matchmaker, sharing a lover's knot pastry, its intertwined dough strands baked with honey, was as good as a public declaration. The strict rules governing these exchanges reveal their seriousness. In some German towns, accepting a silver ring during the solstice celebration obligated the giver to provide a dowry if pregnancy followed. What's often overlooked is how these romantic customs empowered women within rigid social structures. A festival's temporary suspension of norms allowed a wool merchant's widow to assess potential suitors without appearing forward. or a farmer's daughter to reject an unwanted match by accidentally dropping her dance favor into the wrong hands. The May Queen tradition, where the most admired young woman crowned her king with flowers, gave peasant girls rare moments of public authority, their choices respected under the guise of game. Some of history's most famous medieval love stories, like Abelard and Heloise's forbidden passion, began with glances stolen during the Feast of Fools, where anonymity emboldened risk-takers. These fleeting connections rippled through generations. A betrothal sealed at Michaelmas might unite two rival farming families, merging their fields and ending a decade of feuding. The child of parents who met during a Lammas Day wrestling match could grow up to broker peace between warring guilds. Even failed romances left their mark. Court records show many breach of promise lawsuits hinged on witness testimony from festival goers who'd seen couples exchange vows under the summer moon. Far from being mere entertainment, these celebrations were the crucible where personal joy and social stability melted together, forging bonds that shaped kingdoms as surely as treaties and wars. The next time you see a couple holding hands at a county fair, remember, you're witnessing the unbroken thread of a tradition that once wove the fabric of medieval society itself. Guild halls emptied their treasuries when festival season arrived, transforming market squares into dazzling exhibitions of medieval ingenuity. A goldsmith's booth might gleam with filigreed chalices thin as eggshells, while nearby, weavers unfurled tapestries so vivid they seemed to breathe, their threads capturing biblical scenes with the precision of illuminated manuscripts. These weren't just sales pitches, they were auditions for history. When a Nuremberg locksmith presented a puzzle box with 12 hidden compartments at the autumn fair, he wasn't merely haggling over price, he was etching his name into the city's reputation as a hub of precision craft. The stakes were monumental. A single masterwork could secure royal commissions for decades, lifting an entire guild's fortunes. Competitions turned craftsmanship into high-stakes theater. In Florence, the annual Wool Guild Challenge required teams to spin, dye, and weave a full bolt of cloth in public view, a marathon of skill where apprentices' hands blistered under the judge's gaze. Victors earned more than ribbons. Their techniques became guild standards, copied in workshops across Europe. Metalworkers faced especially grueling trials. A Coventry armorer's helm had to endure a point-blank crossbow shot during the Midsummer Fair, its dent marked with the tester's seal as a badge of honor. These brutal quality tests weren't just spectacle, they forged trust in an era before consumer protections. A shopper buying a Strasbourg Servilier helmet knew its curved steel had already deflected a poleaxe blow before reaching the stall. Apprentice inductions were the festival's most poignant rituals. Picture a 15-year-old kneeling before the Carpenters' Guild masters, his trembling hands presenting a jointed wooden chest, every dovetail and mortise proof of 7 years' labor. The public vow-taking ceremony, with its scripted questions and symbolic tools, mirrored a knight's dubbing. When the guildmaster draped the blue mantle of journeyman status over the boy's shoulders, the crowd's cheers cemented his identity far beyond family ties. These rites served dual purposes. They inspired children watching from the crowd to envision their futures, while warning unscrupulous traders that every guild member had witnesses to their training. A baker caught selling undersized loaves didn't just face fines. His whole guild shared the shame, their festival banners temporarily furled in disgrace. Beyond commerce, these displays nurtured civic pride. Tourists gaped at Bruges lacemakers creating patterns finer than spiderwebs, while locals swelled with ownership, our craftsmen, our traditions. The St. Crispin's Day Shoemakers Parade, with its giant leather-stuffed effigies of the patron saint, blurred the line between worship and worker solidarity. Even the humblest crafts found glory. Coopers raced to assemble barrels watertight enough to hold wine for noble tastings, while basket weavers competed in speed trials, their fingers flying through willow strands as onlookers placed bets. The legacy of these exhibitions lives on in unexpected ways. Modern trade shows with their product demos and skill competitions are direct descendants, as are reality shows like Forged in Fire, where artisans prove their mettle under pressure. But what's lost is the communal intimacy, the way a master potter might pause his wheel to guide a child's hands through the clay, or how a blacksmith's failed blade became a teaching tool rather than trash. In an age of mass production, we've kept the competition but forgotten the covenant. That excellence isn't just measured in sales, but in the knowledge passed hand to hand under festival tents, where sawdust and ambition mingled in equal measure. On the 1st of January each year, cathedral towns across medieval Europe witnessed a scene that would have been unthinkable any other day. A lowly choir boy, robed in makeshift bishop's vestments, processing down the nave while the actual clergy followed behind, their solemn chants replaced by raucous donkey brays. This was the Feast of Fools, where social hierarchies didn't just bend, they snapped. For 24 delirious hours, servants sat at the head of banquet tables, peasants delivered mock sermons in gibberish Latin, and even the most pious townsfolk danced backward around altars wearing animal masks. The sheer audacity of these reversals would have bordered on treason had they occurred in June, but under the Twelvenites' sanctioned chaos, they became sacred comedy. Behind the laughter lay a razor-sharp critique. Mystery plays performed during these festivals often featured drunkard priests auctioning off fake relics or noblemen tripping over their own exaggerated codpieces. In France, the sottise satirical farces performed by guilds, men depicted kings as bumbling fools led by their stomachs, while in Germany, fastnacht plays showed devils gleefully tallying the sins of greedy merchants. The genius of these performances was their plausible deniability. A lord might recognize his own stinginess in a miserly character, but calling it out would only confirm the parody's accuracy. Like court jesters who spoke truth under the guise of madness, festival satire wrapped its barbs in enough absurdity to make them palatable. Authorities tolerated, even encouraged, this controlled rebellion because they understood its alternative. Peasants who spent a day pelting their landlord with harmless flour during the Battle of the Bread Ovens were less likely to torch his barn come spring. Records from Burgundy describe a count who annually surrendered his seal to a jester elected King of Fools, knowing the ritual humiliation bought him good will no tax break could match. Even the church played along, permitting the boy bishop tradition where children temporarily occupied cathedral thrones, a symbolic reminder that spiritual authority shouldn't equate to arrogance. The line between mockery and menace was perilously thin. In 1484, Avignon, a fool's feast parade featuring effigies of corrupt cardinals spiraled into a real riot, forcing the Pope to ban the event for decades. Clever organizers learned to cushion their critiques. A play mocking tax collectors might follow a flattering skit about the king's wisdom, or a procession of greedy monks could end with the same actors distributing alms. This delicate dance poking power without drawing blood became its own art form. What's striking is how these traditions empowered the voiceless. A miller's wife could openly ridicule her lecherous priest by playing his caricature in the village play, her identity shielded by a painted mask. Landless laborers took turns as Lord of Misrule, their temporary decrees like mandating that masters serve apprentices for a day, giving literal shape to their dreams of justice. Even children participated, their innocent voices allowed to sing cheeky verses about lazy bailiffs that would earn adults a whipping. Modern parallels abound, from political cartoons to late-night comedy roasts. But medieval satire had one crucial difference. It wasn't consumed passively on screens, but lived collectively in town squares, when a crowd roared with laughter at a puppet show skewering the tax assessor. That shared catharsis reinforced communal bonds. The powerful grasped an essential truth that laughter, when directed upward, rarely topples thrones. Instead, it oils the hinges of a system just enough to keep the gates from splintering under pressure. In an age without voting booths or free presses, festivals became the original op-ed pages, where the pen was a jester's staff and every joke carried the weight of a manifesto. Children's laughter rang through the festival grounds like a chorus of tiny bells, their games weaving through the crowds like threads of pure joy. Blind Man's Bluff wasn't just a diversion. It was a lesson in spatial awareness, with children navigating the chaos of stalls and legs while blindfolded, honing senses they'd later rely on in dim workshops or moonlit harvests. Little girls played selling at market with acorn caps and pebbles, practicing the arithmetic and haggling skills their mothers used daily, while boys staged mock jousts on stick horses, their improvised lances teaching balance and hand-eye coordination long before they'd hold real weapons. Even the simplest chase games had purpose. The stamina built from darting between tents would one day translate to outrunning livestock or working dawn to dusk during planting season. Festivals transformed learning into living theater. At the blacksmith stall, a gruff master might let a wide-eyed boy pump the bellows, his small hands contributing to the creation of a nail or hook, a tangible first taste of craftsmanship. Young girls gathered around dyer's vats, memorizing the alchemy of weld flowers turning wool golden or madder root staining linen crimson, knowledge passed down not from books but from stained fingertips and steam-scented air. Some guilds staged miniature workshops where children could carve soapstone or braid cords, their creations judged alongside adults in categories like neatest stitching or most ingenious design. These weren't just activities, they were auditions for future livelihoods, with masters discreetly scouting talent among the playing children. Coming-of-age rituals turned festivals into transformative stages. In northern Germany, a 14-year-old boy might kneel before the butcher's guild during the spring fair, his first clean shave performed publicly with a ceremonial knife before he received his apprentice apron. Swiss Alpine communities timed their Rootly Oath ceremonies to midsummer, where teens pledged fealty to their canton while standing on a shield held by their fathers, a literal lifting into adulthood. For girls, the transition often centered on fertility symbolism. In Provençal villages, a maiden's first wreath weaving at the May Day festival marked her entry into marriageable status, her floral crown scrutinized by potential suitors' families for signs of dexterity and creativity. The darker side of these rites balanced celebration with solemnity. Welsh mining towns held pit baptisms during solstice festivals, where boys as young as 12 were lowered into shallow shafts to emerge smudged with coal dust, a visceral welcome to the dangers of man's work. Fishermen's sons along the Brittany coast endured salt tests, their forearms rubbed raw with brine during St. Brendan's Day to inure them to the ocean's sting. These trials weren't cruelty but necessity. In a world where childhood ended early, festivals provided structure, if sometimes harsh passage into responsibility. What's often overlooked is how these experiences shaped medieval psychology. A child who'd successfully navigated the labyrinth game at Michaelmas, a maze of hay bales representing life's twists, might recall its lessons when facing actual crossroads years later. The camaraderie forged during team games like tug of war or sack races translated into adult cooperation during village projects. Even festival sweets served as tiny teachers. Gingerbread molded into armor shapes introduced heraldry, while sugar-coated letters helped toddlers recognize their initials. Every element conspired to mold the young while letting them believe they were merely playing. The echoes of this dual purpose linger today in scout jamborees or school field days, though stripped of the urgency that once governed medieval childhoods. Back then, play wasn't just preparation for life, it was life's first draft, written in the dust of festival grounds where every game hid a lesson, and every laugh carried the weight of generations whispering, "Watch closely, little one. Your future begins here." The roar of the crowd rose with the grizzly's enraged bellow as chains yanked it toward a pack of slavering mastiffs, a brutal spectacle known as bear baiting, where the line between sport and savagery blurred. These grim contests, staged in festival pits across medieval Europe, weren't merely bloodshed for its own sake. They were visceral metaphors for humanity's struggle to dominate nature. Noblemen wagered fortunes on which dog would land the killing bite, while peasants vicariously unleashed their own pent-up frustrations through the violence. Yet even here, paradox thrived. The same bear that endured torment one day might be paraded through town the next as a heraldic emblem on a lord's banner, its image transforming from victim to symbol of indomitable strength. Far above the bloodied sawdust of the baiting ring, another animal commanded awe without cruelty: the falcon. A lord's peregrine, its jesses embroidered with his coat of arms, represented more than hunting prowess. It was a feathered diplomat. The gift of a trained gyrfalcon could secure alliances between kingdoms, while the theft of one might spark wars. Falconry displays at festivals were meticulously choreographed theater, hoods removed on cue, birds rising like living jewelry against the sky, then diving to strike lures with precision. The real message wasn't just "see my wealth," but "witness my control over nature's most untamable forces." A well-trained hawk mirrored its owner's power, swift to anger yet obedient to the glove. Livestock fairs pulsed with a quieter but no less vital energy. Here, the prize oxen and sheep weren't destined for slaughter, but for improving bloodlines across regions. Farmers scrutinized teeth and hooves like gemologists evaluating diamonds, while wives compared notes on which ewes bore twins or which bulls sired the hardiest calves. The economic stakes were monumental. A champion ram might service flocks for miles around, his offspring lifting entire villages out of subsistence living. These gatherings birthed early animal husbandry standards: rules against selling wind-suckers, horses with a debilitating air-gulping habit, or broken-mouthed, aged sheep protected buyers in an era before warranties. Mythology came alive through festival animals, blurring reality and legend. A dragon, crafted from painted linen and willow hoops, might writhe through streets during Corpus Christi processions, its papier-mâché scales rattling as saintly knights pretended to slay it. More chilling were the living beasts cast in symbolic roles. A white stag borrowed from royal forests to represent Christ in mystery plays, or a chained wolf paraded during winter solstice as the embodiment of darkness soon to be conquered by returning light. Even insects played parts. Beekeepers showcased hives during rogation tide, their honeycombs carried like sacred relics in prayers for abundance. The treatment of these creatures reveals medieval Europe's conflicted soul. The same culture that baited bears for sport also passed the first animal protection laws: 13th century statutes forbidding plowing horses to be whipped until bloody, or requiring rest days for oxen. Festival bread was baked into shapes honoring the animals that sustained communities: horned cattle for Plough Monday, doves for Pentecost. This duality, cruelty and reverence, utility and symbolism, mirrored humanity's own place in the medieval world, both master of beasts and fellow mortal under God's gaze. Perhaps no tradition captures this tension better than the Christmas Beasts Mass, where farmers led livestock into churches to be blessed with holy water and incense. For one night, the ox knelt beside the ploughman, both creatures of the same earth, sharing in the mystery of a divine child born among animals. In that fleeting moment, the festival's roar faded, revealing the quiet truth beneath the spectacle, that medieval lives were inextricably woven with the beasts who fed them, frightened them, and carried their dreams. The skeleton of the town shifted as festival season arrived, its bones rearranged by armies of carpenters and drapers working through the night. Grandstands sprouted like wooden mushrooms around tournament fields, their tiered benches held together with pegs and prayer, sturdy enough to bear the weight of cheering crowds but designed to vanish without a trace once the knights departed. Canvases dyed in saffron and madder billowed between poles, transforming muddy market squares into kingdoms of colored light, where the air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint rather than dung and damp wool. Even the churchyards underwent metamorphosis. Stone walls disappeared behind tapestries depicting biblical scenes, while temporary altars erected in fields allowed entire villages to gather under the open sky for Mass. These were not just decorations, but deliberate illusions, conjuring a world where ordinary rules of space and hierarchy momentarily dissolved. The real magic lay in how quickly these structures adapted to their dual roles. A butcher's stall by day became a puppet theater by night. Its counter flipped vertically to form a stage, bloodstains hidden by flickering torchlight. Watchmen's towers doubled as platforms for heralds announcing joust results, their narrow staircases now trod by minstrels and messengers. In wealthy towns like Bruges or Ghent, waterborne festivals turned canals into floating theaters, with barges lashed together to create islands for mystery plays. One moment a ship might represent Noah's Ark, the next it transformed into Herod's palace through strategically hung banners. The temporary architecture wasn't just functional, it was participatory. When villagers hoisted the maypole, they weren't merely erecting a decoration, but becoming the pillars of the celebration itself, their collective effort raising the centerpiece around which all other structures would orbit. For all their impermanence, these constructions followed meticulous traditions. In southern France, the pavois, a wooden shield-shaped stage for troubadours, had to measure exactly 12 feet across, its proportions believed to optimize acoustics for poetry recitals. German Christmas markets mandated that stalls selling gingerbread stand no closer than 3 paces to those hawking hot wine, preventing sugar-melted chaos. The ephemeral nature allowed for astonishing innovation. Rotating platforms in Italian pageant wagons created moving tableaus of saints ascending to heaven, while English harvest festivals featured collapsing cornucopias that spilled real fruit into the crowd on cue. This was architecture as performance, where beams and nails became actors in the spectacle. What's often forgotten is how these temporary spaces democratized the medieval world. A peasant who'd never set foot in a castle's great hall could now stand beneath vaulted fabric ceilings in a merchant's festival pavilion, the same silk drapes shielding him from the sun as the local lord. Children peered through knotholes in tournament fences, their eyes level with the action in a way no permanent stadium would allow. Even sacred spaces became accessible. When cathedral naves overflowed during Pentecost, makeshift chapels in tavern courtyards offered communion under hop-draped beams, the holy and the humble sharing the same sky. The legacy of these designs lives on in surprising ways. Modern pop-up shops and food truck plazas mirror the medieval fair's transient commerce, while festival tents at Coachella or Glastonbury owe their DNA to those medieval pavilions. But what's lost is the collective craftsmanship, the way an entire town became architects for a day, shaping spaces meant to be experienced intensely, then released like breath. These structures taught a profound lesson, that joy thrives not in permanence, but in moments built deliberately to fade. their memory lingering like the scent of fresh-cut pine long after the last peg is pulled from the earth. Flames licked the midsummer sky as entire villages circled the roaring bonfire, their shadows stretching like giants across the fields, a living ring of light against the encroaching dark. These towering pyres weren't just communal hearths, they were acts of defiance. In a world where nightfall meant vulnerability to wolves, bandits, and the terrors of imagination, fire rituals reclaimed power from the shadows. The logic was visceral. If light equaled safety, then more light meant more protection. Farmers fed the blaze with bundles of dried juniper, its crackling resin believed to purify the air of plague miasmas, while midwives whispered charms as they tossed in herbs tied with red thread, petitioning for easy births in the year ahead. Even the ashes held purpose, sprinkled across fields to bless crops or pressed into amulets to guard against the evil eye. Torchlit processions transformed fear into spectacle. On the winter solstice, when daylight dwindled to a fragile sliver, villagers carried flames from the church's eternal lamp into their homes, each flickering taper a thread connecting heaven to hearth. In the Alps, sun wheels woven from straw were set ablaze and rolled down hillsides, their arcs mimicking the solar path they begged to restore. The light served practical magic too. Fishermen's wives lined cliffs with lanterns during St. Elmo's festivals, their glow said to guide both ships and benevolent spirits through stormy seas. Darkness wasn't merely banished, it was rewritten as a canvas for hope. Candle magic blurred piety and pragmatism. Cathedrals glowed during Candlemas with thousands of beeswax tapers, their smoke carrying prayers upward like spiritual Morse code. Wealthy patrons competed to donate the most elaborate candelabras, their polished surfaces reflecting light exponentially, a metaphor for divine grace multiplying through generosity. Humble households practiced thriftier devotions. A single, poor soul's candle might burn all night in a turnip hollow, its fat wick honoring departed ancestors. The interplay of shadow and illumination became sacred theater. Monks chanted the Tenebrae service in gradually darkened chapels, only for the Easter vigil to erupt in a blaze of renewed tapers, symbolizing resurrection through literal rekindling. The deeper genius of these traditions lay in their duality. Bonfires on St. John's Eve repelled witches while conveniently clearing brush from field boundaries. Torch-bearing processions to bless orchards doubled as pest control, the smoke deterring insects from fruit trees. Even the most mystical acts had roots in observation. Peasants noticed how bonfire-adjacent fields grew greener and deduced the ashes' fertilizing properties, layering scientific discovery beneath ritual. This wasn't superstition, it was proto-science wrapped in symbolism, a way to encode agricultural wisdom in memorable ceremonies. Modern echoes of these light rituals persist in unexpected corners. Christmas tree lights trace back to candle-adorned paradise trees from medieval mystery plays, while Halloween jack-o'-lanterns descend from Celtic turnip lanterns meant to confuse malevolent spirits. The human instinct to gather around flame, whether campfire, candlelit vigil, or festival lantern release, still taps into that ancient understanding. That light shared is fear halved. The medievals grasped a truth we've since electrified but not erased, that in the dance between fire and darkness, we don't just see better, we remember we're not alone. Town criers didn't just compete with jugglers and minstrels for attention, they were the original breaking news alerts, their booming voices cutting through festival chaos to deliver updates that could alter lives. Picture a herald in scarlet and gold livery climbing onto a makeshift stage at the Lammas Fair, unrolling a parchment bearing the king's seal. His announcement, perhaps a new tax on wool or the birth of a royal heir, would ripple through the crowd in murmurs and gasps, spreading faster than the ale from barrel to cup. But the real genius of this system lay in its timing. Authorities deliberately scheduled proclamations during festivals when maximum ears were present. A decree announced at the St. Giles Fair in Oxford might reach Cornwall by Michaelmas, carried not by couriers but by merchants and pilgrims who'd memorized the crier's words like human RSS feeds. Traveling performers served as medieval journalists with a side of entertainment. A troubadour's ballad about a battle in Flanders wasn't just artistry. It was investigative reporting set to rhyme, with verses updated as he traveled from fair to fair. Minstrels mastered the art of tuning their material. A song mocking a lord's failed hunt might play well in rival territories but soften to vague satire near the noble's lands. These musical newsmen even had sources: washerwomen whispering about castle scandals, stable boys overhearing diplomats' gossip distilled into catchy refrains that stuck in listeners' minds better than any dry proclamation. The most successful performers acted like walking newspapers, their repertoires divided into sections: political ballads for tavern crowds, comic tales for market squares, and devotional songs for pilgrimage routes. Pilgrims turned spiritual journeys into information superhighways. A Canterbury-bound traveler might depart with news of a London riot and return home with updates on shrine miracles, all while trading tips about which inns had bedbugs or where highwaymen lurked. The Santiago de Compostela route functioned like a medieval wire service, with pilgrims' badges, tin souvenirs pinned to hats, acting as conversation starters. A badge from Rome might prompt questions about the Pope's health, while one from Jerusalem carried weighty updates on Crusader fortunes. Monasteries along these routes doubled as newsrooms, their guestbooks filled with travelers' accounts of distant famines, wars, or oddities like the two-headed calf born in Mainz. The darker side of this network thrived in festival shadows. At the Champagne fairs, silk merchants whispered about Mongol movements gleaned from Silk Road contacts, while fugitives swapped tips about which towns were burning heretics. Underground ballad sheets, crudely inked verses set to familiar tunes, spread revolutionary ideas under the guise of entertainment. Authorities tried policing this flow. After the Peasants' Revolt of 1381, English laws forbade unlicensed performers from singing about current events. But enforcement was hopeless, much like trying to stop memes today. What's astonishing is how these informal systems achieved remarkable accuracy. Chronicles from multiple regions often align on major events, suggesting festival gossip had self-correcting mechanisms. If three separate groups of pilgrims all reported the French king's illness, it likely held truth. The system even had fact-checkers. Educated friars who traveled widely could debunk outlandish claims during sermon interludes at fairs. The legacy of this organic news network lingers in plain sight. Modern stock markets still use medieval terms like fair value, a nod to price setting at trade fairs. Election campaigns harness the power of catchy slogans, much like minstrels crafted infectious choruses. Even our habit of absorbing news through entertainment, think historical dramas or satirical news, shows echoes those festival crowds learning of the world through song and spectacle. The medievals understood something we're relearning in the digital age: that information travels fastest when wrapped in story, and that the most powerful truths aren't just heard, they're performed. Death crept into medieval festivals not as a specter to be feared, but as an honored guest at the table. On All Saints' Day, churchyards transformed into bustling gathering places where families spread cloths over tombstones, sharing loaves of soul bread and cups of spiced wine with long-gone ancestors. This wasn't macabre, it was intimate. A widow might leave her husband's favorite cheese at his grave, while children placed carved wooden toys beside small burial mounds, their laughter mingling with whispered prayers. The line between the living and the dead grew porous during these celebrations, as if the veil between worlds had thinned to the transparency of finest silk. Morality plays staged during these festivals delivered their warnings with theatrical flair. A grinning skeleton might tap a reveler's shoulder during a lively dance, handing them an hourglass with most sand already fallen, a visceral reminder that joy and mortality were inseparable partners. These Dance of Death performances weren't meant to terrify but to equalize. Kings and beggars alike were led away by bony figures in frescoes and pageants, driving home the message that earthly status meant nothing in the face of eternity. The genius lay in their timing. These sobering messages arrived amidst feasting, allowing the lesson to settle gently rather than harshly. Communal grief found unexpected catharsis in these rituals. A village that had lost children to plague might gather to burn effigies of the grim reaper during the Feast of Fools, their mockery of death taking the sting from fresh wounds. In Brittany, families sailed miniature lantern-lit boats down rivers on All Souls' Night, each tiny vessel carrying the name of a loved one, their flickering lights creating a constellation of memory on the dark water. Even the food served carried symbolic weight, graveyard cakes baked with caraway seeds, believed to represent the soul's journey, or apples buried in dough to symbolize life's cyclical nature. The medieval approach to mourning held a radical honesty modern cultures often lack. A funeral procession might pause at the local tavern for ale and storytelling about the deceased's exploits, transforming tears into laughter. Memorial tournaments allowed knights to honor fallen comrades through sport rather than somber speeches, their clashing swords becoming a celebration of lives lived boldly. This blending of sorrow and celebration wasn't denial, it was wisdom. By making space for death within the rhythm of communal joy, medieval people crafted a resilience that acknowledged loss without being consumed by it. These traditions linger in surprising ways today. Mexico's Dia de los Muertos, with its sugar skulls and marigold altars, carries echoes of medieval soul cakes and grave decorations. Our Halloween, though stripped of much solemnity, descends from the Celtic Samhain festivals that similarly blurred the boundaries between living and dead. Perhaps there's something profoundly human in this instinct to grasp death's hand and invite it to dance, if only for a day, remembering that grief and gladness can share the same table when a community gathers to honor what's been lost and celebrate what remains. Venice's Grand Canal transformed into a shimmering stage during Carnival, its waters crowded with gondolas carrying masked nobles whose identities dissolved behind gilded papier-mâché. These weren't mere costumes, they were social equalizers, allowing a silk merchant to flirt with a countess or a servant to mock his master without consequence. The masks themselves told stories, the long-beaked plague doctor design nodding to the city's medical history, while delicate mortar masks worn by women silenced their voices with buttons held between teeth, a poignant metaphor for societal constraints. Contrast this with Scotland's Beltane fires blazing atop the Highlands, where cattle were driven between twin bonfires to purify them before summer grazing. The difference wasn't just aesthetic but existential. Venice's maritime wealth bred lavish anonymity, while Scotland's rugged terrain demanded rituals to protect livelihoods from nature's whims. Coastal communities wove their survival into celebration. In Brittany's Pardon of the Sea Festival, fishing boats were draped with nets strung with wooden saints, their painted eyes scanning the horizon alongside living sailors. The blessing of the fleet wasn't theater, it was insurance, with priests anointing hulls with chrism while fishermen's wives kept vigil with lanterns on the cliffs. Meanwhile, landlocked Burgundy's grape-stomping festivals turned labor into revelry, with vats of new wine shared in the very vineyards where monks had charted terroir's alchemy. A vineyard worker's stained feet and a Breton sailor's salt-crusted boots both told the same truth. Festivals weren't escapes from work, but sanctifications of it. Mountain villages crafted traditions as steep as their slopes. Swiss alpine communities celebrated the Alpabzug by descending with cattle decorated like bridal parties' flower crowns on horned brows, bells tuned to harmonic scales, a gratitude ritual for safe summer pasturing. Down in the valleys, German mining towns honored St. Anne with underground chapel services, their walls glittering with ore veins that funded the very festivals above ground. Even the timing of events followed nature's lead. Spanish sheepherders held transhumance festivals when flocks moved between seasonal grazing lands, while Swedish villagers timed their midsummer to the summer solstice's endless light, knowing winter's darkness demanded counterbalance. The Arctic Circle birthed festivals unimaginable in Mediterranean warmth. In Norse settlements, the Yule festival saw communities gather in smoke-filled longhouses to await the sun's return, their feasts of fermented shark and ale punctuated by storytelling contests judged by the grizzled elders. The winning tale wasn't merely entertainment, it was a lifeline against seasonal depression, its vivid imagery staving off the psychological toll of perpetual night. Meanwhile, Venetian winters were mild enough for outdoor masquerades, their carnival dates floating with the liturgical calendar rather than being shackled to survival needs. Urban centers turned festivals into competitive branding. Florence's Calcio Storico merged rugby, wrestling, and royal pageantry in a match played in medieval Piazza Santa Croce, a deliberate showcase of the city's martial vigor and artistic flair. The teams represented historic quarters, their 16th-century costumes reminding spectators of neighborhood rivalries older than the tournament itself. Compare this to the quiet dignity of English village well dressings, where natural springs were adorned with intricate petal mosaics honoring patron saints. The same faith that inspired Venetian mask makers to craft devilish carnival faces also moved Derbyshire farmers to spend weeks creating ephemeral floral art, one loud and boastful, the other humble and transient. These regional variations weren't accidents but adaptations. A Catalan Correfoc fire run where devil-costumed dancers showered crowds with sparks made little sense in timber-built Norwegian villages vulnerable to conflagration. Similarly, Iceland's Thorablot feasts of fermented shark and smoked lamb reflected limited ingredients rather than preference. The festivals became living maps, charting not just geography but the contours of human ingenuity, proof that culture grows from the ground up, shaped by the very soil, sea, and seasons it celebrates. When a Venetian noble donned his mask or a Scottish shepherd leaped the Beltane flames, they weren't just honoring tradition. They were speaking in the dialect of their homeland, with every gesture, every song, every ritual dish whispering the story of how their people survived and thrived in a particular corner of a vast and varied world. The scent of roasted turkey legs and the clang of blacksmith's hammers at your local Renaissance fair aren't just nostalgic nods to history. They're living threads connecting us directly to those vibrant medieval gatherings. Walk through the gates of any modern Ren fair, and you're stepping into a carefully crafted echo of the past, where artisans demonstrate centuries-old crafts like glassblowing and leatherworking, not as museum exhibits, but as hands-on experiences. The jousting tournaments, they're more than thrilling spectacles. They're descendants of those very same nightly competitions that once doubled as political theater and social training grounds. Even the bawdy tavern songs belted out by performers in ale-stained doublets trace their lineage to the minstrels who spread news and satire through catchy ballads. What's fascinating is how these events have democratized history. Where medieval festivals reinforced rigid social hierarchies, today's Renaissance fairs invite everyone, whether in denim or handmade Elizabethan gowns, to participate in the pageantry. Christmas markets across Europe wear their medieval DNA proudly. The twinkling stalls of Nuremberg's Christkindlesmarkt or Vienna's Rathasplatz don't just sell ornaments and gingerbread. They recreate the sensory overload of medieval trade fairs, where spices from distant lands and handcrafted treasures sparked wonder. Those intricately carved nutcrackers and delicate glass baubles, they're the spiritual heirs of the guild masterpieces displayed at winter festivals to attract noble patrons. Even the tradition of sipping mulled wine while wandering snow-dusted lanes mirrors medieval processions where communities huddled together against the cold, their breath mingling with the steam from spiced cider bowls. The stall's emphasis on craftsmanship over mass production, whether it's a pewter smith's wares or a candlemaker's dripped creations, consciously rejects modern disposability, offering a tactile link to when every object told a story of its maker's hands. Music festivals, surprisingly, owe their scaffolding to medieval roots. The sprawling campsites of Coachella or Glastonbury mirror the temporary cities that sprouted around pilgrimage sites and trade fairs, where strangers became neighbors under shared skies. The stage designs, from the neon-lit towers of EDM festivals to the rustic wooden platforms of folk gatherings, unconsciously echo the pageant wagons and makeshift theaters that once brought biblical stories to life for illiterate crowds. Even the festival merchandise band tees replacing pilgrim badges serves the same purpose: wearable proof of participation in something larger than oneself. The medieval tradition of blending education with entertainment thrives here too. Workshops on sustainable living or indigenous cultures at modern festivals parallel the way mystery plays smuggled moral lessons into captivating drama. Perhaps the most enduring legacy lies in how these events preserve the medieval understanding of time. Where our digital age flattens days into interchangeable units, festivals like May Day parades or solstice bonfires force us to acknowledge the turning year. The pumpkin patches of Halloween and the flower crowns of summer festivals are direct descendants of medieval celebrations that marked planting and harvest. Modern farmers' markets, with their seasonal produce and artisanal cheeses, unconsciously replicate the rhythmic commerce of medieval fairs, where food wasn't always available but was all the more precious for its scarcity. The real magic happens when these traditions adapt. Medieval festivals were tools of survival: social, economic, spiritual. Today, they've become choices, yet they fulfill a similar hunger. In an age of algorithms and isolation, the urge to gather, whether at a comic convention cosplaying as knights and wizards, or a neighborhood block party with shared dishes, speaks to something ancient in our bones. The laughter echoing across a Renaissance fair's archery range, the collective gasp as a Christmas market's tree lights flicker on, the thousand voices singing along at a concert under the stars, these aren't just entertainment. Their rituals were written for a new era, proving that what once bound villages together still holds power: the simple, stubborn joy of being human together. Medieval festivals were more than just the background noise of history. They were the vibrant heartbeat of an entire era, pulsing with lessons we're still unraveling today. Think about the last time you wandered through a farmer's market, watching artisans demonstrate age-old crafts, or cheered at a local parade where neighbors became temporary kings and queens of the float. These moments aren't just modern pastimes, they're living heirlooms passed down through centuries. The festivals of the Middle Ages didn't just entertain, they built civilizations. They turned dusty market squares into open-air universities where a child could learn chemistry from a dyer's vats or physics from a blacksmith's forge. They transformed sacred rituals into communal experiences, where the touch of a relic or the taste of blessed bread connected the humblest serf to something divine. Consider the sheer ingenuity of these gatherings. In an age without newspapers, festivals became the breaking news alerts, minstrels singing ballads of distant battles, heralds announcing royal decrees between jousting matches. Without social media, they crafted viral moments through spectacle. A merchant's daughter crowned May Queen one day might inspire songs sung across kingdoms by midsummer. And in a world where power often flowed through the edge of a sword, festivals offered a subtler kind of control where a king could assert dominance not by force, but by hosting a banquet so lavish it left visitors whispering for years. What's truly remarkable is how these events balanced contradictions with grace. A single festival could uphold rigid social hierarchies while allowing a day of sanctioned rebellion, where peasants mocked nobles in satirical plays. It could be deeply sacred and wildly profane, like the Feast of Fools, where choir boys sang hymns in the morning and staged raucous parodies by afternoon. Even the architecture was fluid. Makeshift stages rose overnight only to vanish without a trace, leaving no physical mark yet etching memories into collective consciousness. The legacy lives on in ways we rarely pause to notice. That cozy neighborhood potluck, it's the descendant of medieval harvest feasts where entire villages shared one communal loaf. The buzz of a Christmas market with its handcrafted ornaments and spiced wine channels the same warmth as a winter fair where candlelight held back the longest night. Even our modern protests and pride parades owe a debt to those medieval processions that turned streets into stages for social change. So the next time you lose yourself in the laughter of a street festival or feel that electric thrill of a crowd singing in unison, remember, you're not just having fun. You're stepping into a current of history that once carried kingdoms on its tide. These traditions survived plagues, wars, and revolutions because they answer something timeless in us: the need to belong, to marvel, to collectively catch our breath between life's struggles. Whether it's the scent of roasting chestnuts or the sound of a lone fiddle cutting through the chatter, these moments stitch us back into the grand tapestry where every thread, past and present, matters. If this journey through the festival fires of history sparked your curiosity, share your thoughts below. Would you brave the crowds at a champagne fair or dance the night away at a solstice bonfire? Hit like if you learned something unexpected, subscribe for more deep dives into the past, and as always, keep listening for the echoes of history in your everyday life. They're closer than you think.